Hey, hi, how's it going? If you've been here before and you're back for more, I appreciate you to my very core. But if you're new here, welcome. My name is Becca, and I tell your own personal paranormal experiences through short stories. If you have a personal paranormal experience that you'd like me to share and be featured on this channel, make sure to message me on Instagram. The link is in the bio. Without further ado, ba-doo boo boo, here is today's story. In July of 2021, Maddie, her husband, and their 9-month-old son went down to South California to visit Maddie's aunt and uncle. Sadly, Maddie's aunt had just recently been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, so they weren't really sure how much time she had left. So Maddie, her husband, and their 9-month-old son pack up their stuff and head down to South California. When they arrived there, Maddie's uncle and aunt actually lended them the RV that was on their property for them to stay in while they were there. Maddie and her husband were already kind of nervous about traveling with their 9-month-old son, so it was somewhat of a relief to them knowing that they had their own personal space if they needed it. The trip itself, however, was going as well as it could given the uncertainty surrounding Maddie's aunt's recent diagnosis, but ultimately they just made the trip as best as they could under the circumstances they were under. They also made time to visit other family and friends that were close by that they hadn't seen in years, and overall it was a really good trip. On the very last night of the trip, Maddie, her husband, and their son went into the RV to go to bed for the night. Now, this RV was a really nice RV. On one end of the RV, it had the master bedroom where Maddie and her son co-slept, and on the other end of the RV was this living room type setup, but it had a fold-down bed where her husband slept, as the bed in the master bedroom wasn't really big enough to sleep all three of them comfortably. So it's the very last night of their trip, and Maddie and her husband and their son are just completely exhausted, so it didn't take them long to fall asleep for the night. So it's the middle of the night, and Maddie is abruptly awoken, and she doesn't know what has woken her up, but she's awake. So she opens her eyes and she looks down the hallway towards the living room area where her husband's sleeping, and she sees this man. Now, she couldn't make out any of the facial features or anything like that. It just looked like this dark mass in the middle of the night. But thinking she's still half asleep and she's seeing things, she starts to rub her eyes to wake herself up and be like, "You're not actually seeing this." But then when she opens her eyes again, she can clearly see this man figure standing in the hallway of the RV. And this figure wouldn't just stand there, it would move. It would pop behind the wall that divided the master bedroom to the living room, and then it would pop back out again. After this figure's done this about 2 to 3 times, Maddie's like, okay, I'm not imagining this. This is something I'm actually seeing. But then she remembers her uncle had to work really late that night, so maybe he just came into the RV to say goodbye to them, knowing that they were leaving early in the morning. So Maddie calls out, "Uncle?" But this figure doesn't respond like her uncle would have. This figure then darts behind the wall again. Now, Maddie knows this isn't her husband, as she can clearly hear him snoring very loudly from the living room. Maddie has no idea what she's seeing, but she knows she sees a man. It's a figure of a man, and it looks so similar to the build and stature of her uncle. So really confused as to what the heck is going on. She knows she's seeing a man figure. The figure looks identical to the same build and stature of her uncle. Maybe he didn't hear me when I called out to him. So she gets out of bed, walks down the hallway towards the area where she saw this figure kind of jump behind the wall. And when she gets there, there's no one there. Nothing. So now Maddie's freaked right out, and she's like, okay, enough's enough. She runs over to her husband. She wakes up her husband. She's like, "Did you hear or see anything at all?" And her husband's half asleep, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" And so she went on to explain, "I saw this guy figure in our RV." And the husband's like, "What?" Maddie's like, "I know it sounds crazy, but I saw it. It was the same build as my uncle. I thought it was my uncle. It's not my uncle. He's not here. Just help me check the windows and doors to make sure they're still locked and that nobody's broken into the RV." So they walked around the RV. All the windows and doors were still locked. The husband calmed down Maddie and is like, "You know what? Just go to bed. It's been a long trip, and we'll talk about it in the morning." So Maddie and her husband both settled back to bed for the night. In the morning, however, Maddie was like, "I am not letting this go." So she marched over to her uncle and aunt's house, barged inside. Her uncle was sitting at the kitchen table, and she's like, "I need to tell you what I saw in your RV last night." So she goes on to explain to him, I thought it was you. but it wasn't you. There was nobody there. And her uncle would respond with, "You're messing with me. There's no way." Then he would say, "I don't know what you saw, but I'll give you the history on that RV. That RV used to be my dad's. He traveled in that RV for the better part of 30 years up and down the coastline, just living his best life." He would go on to explain that he inherited that RV from his dad when he passed away 6 months ago. Maddie was pretty shaken up with this whole experience, and she believes that the apparition she saw was, in fact, her uncle's father that had recently passed away. So her and her uncle kind of awkwardly laugh it off, and they say their goodbyes. Maddie and her husband and their son pack up their belongings and head back home. Sadly, only a few weeks after returning home, Maddie's aunt would lose her battle with cancer and unfortunately pass away. Only a few weeks after her aunt's passing, she would see this man again. Maddie was sleeping one night and she remembers a very vivid and disturbing dream she had. She saw the man that she had seen in the RV in her dream. But the only difference this time was when she saw him in the RV, he was more or less a shadow figure. But in her dream, she could see everything, his laugh lines, his eye color, every single facial feature. And he stood there very proudly and looked her dead in the eyes and said, "I tried to tell you, you shouldn't have left." Maddie woke up in a complete panic, absolutely terrified with seeing this man again, wakes up her husband, tells him what she just experienced, and her husband's like, "This is getting wild." That morning, Maddie woke up with determination in her mind, and she was determined to find a photo of her uncle's father. After a few hours of just calling relatives, seeing if they can email her photos, she finally got a hold of her uncle's father's photo. When she saw the photo, without a single of a doubt, knew that this was the man she had seen in the RV and the man that she had seen in her dream the night before. To this day, Maddie hasn't seen her uncle's father in a dream, in an apparition, anywhere for that matter. But this experience really opened Maddie's eyes and made her more aware of understanding potential omens throughout her life. If you enjoyed today's recording, please leave a like or a comment. It's super rewarding. Wishing you nothing but a beautiful, blissful day. See you all on Wednesday. Bye-bye.